My name's Dolly Foster and I'm the horticulturist for the Hoagland Park District. I am coming to you today to talk about vegetable gardening and a little bit about Victory Gardens and their history, very briefly. A lot of talk has been going on about Victory Gardens and vegetable gardening in general all over the news and social media and the internet in recent weeks. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what a Victory Garden is and their importance and why they came about. And then I want to talk to you about starting your own vegetable garden at home in this very strange year. Victory Gardens were a civic project that began during the First World War. In 1916, a need was seen to be able to get Americans growing their own food because a lot of food was being sent by the government over to the Allied nations in Europe. Their farmland had been devastated by 2 years of war at that time. In 1917, the War Gardens Commission began, and a propaganda campaign began all over the United States to try and encourage American citizens to grow their own food in their home gardens, in their yards, in vacant lots, in schoolyards, and things like that. So anywhere they could find land, they wanted citizens to be growing their own food. This went on through World War I. It fell off a little bit in between World War I and World War II, which was about 25 years. And in World War II, it was revived. By the end of World War II, there was an estimated 20 million gardens all over the United States growing food. And that food amounted to about 40% of the produce that was being grown in the United States. This was a very successful campaign to encourage Americans to become a little bit more self-sustainable, to help feed their neighbors, to help feed the poor, to just generally be a patriotic citizen. There was a huge campaign that went along with it, and this campaign of information could definitely be seen from our point of view in the future as propaganda, total propaganda. But this civic program was such a success because of that flood of information throughout the United States in newspapers in the form of pamphlets and posters and things like that. And this got people thinking about being more sustainable. But it only lasted during the war. After World War II, Victory Gardens really fell off as a topic. People didn't really talk about it very much anymore. Some people did continue to grow their own food, but it didn't last into the 70s and 80s. Very few people grew their own food when I was a child in the 70s and 80s. I don't remember very many people other than one neighbor in my whole neighborhood who grew their own food. So, and I think it was kind of like that for a lot of people. The reason why I'm talking about this today is because of this strange time that we're living through right now with the pandemic and the very real fear of food insecurity by many people in our community. And this is because of people losing their jobs and losing their businesses. That being said, one way that we can help ourselves and help each other is by growing our own vegetables. Now, living in the suburbs or the city, I think none of us would really be able to grow all of our own produce for the whole year. You need a rather large piece of property to do that. But we can definitely supplement what we want to eat during the summer by growing our own food. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to go through 10 steps of what you need to know about growing your own vegetable garden for the first time, how to set it up, and it's going to be very brief and very general, and I will write an article that will be a companion to this video. The link for that article will appear on our Facebook page, on the Oakland Park's Gotta Get Gardening Facebook page, and then also Instagram, and you will be able to find the article on the website. In that article I will have links to all different kinds of articles from the U of I Extension where I get a lot of my good gardening information, and I will have links to YouTube videos where I have learned a lot of really good practical vegetable gardening information. The first part of growing a vegetable garden or planning to grow a vegetable garden is site selection. You need a site in full sun. It needs to be 6 hours of sun or more a day, and that is simply because vegetable gardens and vegetable plants need full sun in order to maximize how much they're going to produce. And if you don't have full sun, there are some vegetables that grow better in part shade and full sort of shade, but I don't want to go into that today because that can be kind of a lengthy conversation. The second part is to choose a convenient place for that garden bed to go. Full sun is most important. Convenience, I would say, is number 2. Everything else you can control. Your garden bed should be in the most convenient place possible that is going to prompt you to go and visit it almost daily. A vegetable garden needs to be tended. It's not the type of garden that you can put in the ground and then come back 6 or 8 weeks later and start harvesting vegetables. It just doesn't work that way. Vegetable gardens need to be tended. They need to be weeded, they need to be watered, you need to monitor for pests. And if your garden bed is at the back of your lot, as far away from your garage door and your back door of your house as possible, it is less likely that you're going to go and visit that garden every single day. So I would suggest that it be placed as close to your back door as you can possibly put it. Granted, I realize that backyards are used for a lot of different things. The next thing would be to build your garden. So you have a lot of choices in putting a garden in. You can grow directly in the ground. It would require you to get rid of the sod if that's where you're going to put it. If you do a raised bed, if you build a raised bed is great because it can be put directly on top of the turf. You can line the bed with cardboard, layers of cardboard that will kill the turf and keep the grass from growing up into your garden. Or you can use landscape fabric. You can line the bottom of your bed with landscape fabric and that will also kill the turf and prevent it from growing. It's really important to do that, otherwise your garden will be overrun by grass. And then the third way that you can grow vegetables is in containers. It's really simple. They save space. If you live with a balcony, you can put several buckets, 5-gallon buckets with holes drilled in them on a balcony with vegetables in it, and it can be pretty successful. So the next thing after building the garden is filling the garden with soil. One of the things that is a misconception about vegetable gardening is that you can fill it with black soil all the way to the top. It's really not recommended to fill any kind of container with black soil or what they bagged companies call garden soil, because oftentimes it will compact, it will retain water, water won't be able to drain through it, your plants will be stunted, and you won't get the yield that you want out of your vegetables. So what is recommended is to mix compost in with a very little black soil. And the black soil is important to have in the mix because it has nutrients and minerals that your vegetable plants need. But the compost will keep the soil media light and fluffy. It will be able to drain. It is the perfect environment for carrots to grow. If you wanted to grow carrots, it should be light and fluffy so they can grow long and deep. So that's the kind of thing that you need to keep in mind, that you want light, fluffy soil, but still something that will retain moisture. After that, after filling your garden, you are going to plant your plants. So here is the question: do you plant from seed or do you plant from transplants bought at a store? Well, at this point in the season, I would recommend transplants, and I will put an infographic in with my materials for the article that has some recommendations on that. And I simply recommend transplants right now because as I'm taping this, it's the second week of May, and things are starting to get a little bit late. It's not too late to put in a vegetable garden. Let me make that clear. Let me make that very clear. You can plant a vegetable garden until the middle of June and still get a very, very good amount of produce out of that garden. Don't be afraid to get out there and plant into the middle of June. There's a lot of crops at the community garden that I don't plant until the first and second week of June for certain reasons, and mostly these are squash and the cucumbers. So don't get hung up on that May 15th Mother's Day date that you have to plant your whole garden all in one day, and it has to be planted by Mother's Day to get the most yield out of your garden. You're still going to get yield, it just might not be the maximum amount. And I would say that having something is better than nothing if I wanted fresh vegetables. So planting your transplants is really easy, but I would recommend that your soil media, your compost and black soil media is going to need a little bit of fertilizer in it. You can put a little bit of fertilizer in the bottom of each hole for your vegetable, or you can mix in fertilizer throughout the entire bed Make sure it's organic fertilizer. That's probably the best. It's usually a manure-based fertilizer, the organics, and that really is fantastic fertilizer for your vegetable garden. The next thing is going to be watering. Watering is definitely something that is going to be a little tricky in some parts of the season. Other parts of the season it's going to be really easy. So when we have regular rain, you probably only have to water your garden 2 to 3 times a week, and that's just to keep the soil constantly moist. Gardens need 1 to 2 inches of water a week, just like our lawns do. And one way you can be very successful at keeping the soil to the correct moisture is by mulching your garden. And you can mulch your garden with any number of things. You can use clean grass clippings that have had no insecticides put on them. You can use hay, you can use straw, you can use just hardwood mulch out of a bag, whatever you want to use. It's pretty simple. But this will keep the soil temperature constant, it'll keep things cool, it'll keep the moisture in the soil, things won't evaporate as fast. But watering deeply a couple of times a week is a lot more advantageous to your plants than getting out there and watering a little bit every day. And it is the same idea as watering your lawn. If you water long and deep in your garden, then you will have long, deep roots on your plants, and they will be able to withstand the heat later in the summer better. So make sure that you water properly. The next thing to think about is supporting your plants. If you are planting tomatoes, my best piece of advice would be to buy the biggest, toughest, strongest tomato cage that you can buy. Tomato plants get very large, and you need to be able to support that plant through September while it's still fruiting, and they can become very, very heavy. Just the plant itself, not even the fruit. The plants themselves are extremely heavy. You can trim and prune a tomato plant to try and lighten the load a little bit. It does work, and I will attach a video to my article that will help you with that. It's been very helpful to me over at the community garden. But as far as support goes, tomatoes will need support, beans will need support, cucumbers, you can save a lot of space in your garden if you grow your tomatoes, cucumbers and squash and beans vertically. So skip the bush beans, get pole beans and put them up on a trellis. That's the best way to start save space. The next thing is going to be harvesting. Harvesting is pretty mysterious to first-time gardeners, and I know that it was for me because honestly I had no idea when an eggplant was ripe or not ripe. And so the first couple of seasons at the community garden where we were growing them was, that was interesting, trying to figure out when an eggplant was, when it was time to harvest them. The general rule is to go by what your seed package or what your tag says for the days of maturity for your vegetables. And then also sometimes your tag in your seed packet will say how long or how heavy that fruit should be. Should it be a 4-ounce tomato? Is it going to be an 8-inch long cucumber? It will say on that information. If it doesn't say on the tag, you can look the information up on the internet. You can find a seed package from a different company that will have that information on there. That will really help you in harvesting. The other thing to know about harvesting is that generally when the vegetables on the plant similar to vegetables in the grocery store, they're probably ready to pick. And the longer you vegetable garden, the more practice you will get at harvesting and the better you'll get at it. It just takes some time to figure it out. The next thing for your garden is going to be pests and weeds. As far as pests go, if you can grow as organically as possible, you are going to save a lot of money, you're going to save a lot of time, you will lessen your exposure to pesticides, which I think is really important, and which I also think is one of the most vocal reasons why people are growing their own vegetables is because they want to limit their exposure to pesticides. So plan on monitoring your garden a lot, getting out there and searching out those little pests on your garden plants, and have a small bucket of soapy water out by the garden and just throw those pests right into that bucket of soapy water, and that will kill them instantly. You might not be able to get them all, but if you only have a small garden, you're not going to have a lot of pests. So just keep up the monitoring, keep up the picking of pests off of the plants, and you will not have to get out there and start spraying anything. As far as weeds go, weeds will rob your garden of the soil moisture and of nutrients in the soil. So if you want a really good, successful vegetable garden, it's very important for you to get out there and weed. If you weed once a week or once every 2 weeks and you cultivate the soil, loosen it up at the top, then you will really reduce the amount of weeds that you're going to have in that garden. If you only get out there and weed towards the end of the season, that creates a big problem, and that cuts down on how many vegetables you're actually going to be able to bring into the house to eat, because the plants will just be too crowded. It's going to cut down on the flowering on the plants, and then the plants won't be producing a lot of seed. Also, if you have weeds in your garden that are producing flowers, the pollinators might go to those plants instead of your vegetable plants, and that is a big problem for your yield. You will just not have as much fruit if you don't have the pollinators pollinating your plants. The last thing is, at the end of the season, clean up your garden. Throw away all of those vegetable plants when you're done with them. Put them into your yard waste containers. Get rid of it, because you do not want it hanging around on the soil of your bed all winter. If your plant has any spores of any kind of mold or mildew or any other kind of leaf disease, that is going to harbor in the soil over the winter, and it will splash up onto your plants in the next spring, and you will have a really, really bad fungal outbreak the next year. And that definitely will affect how much produce you're getting off of your plants. The last thing I want to say is I have some tips for success. One of the things for tomatoes is to water consistently. There is a problem with some tomatoes that happens called blossom end rot, and this is a combination of inconsistent water and the calcium level in the soil. Now, oftentimes gardens have sufficient calcium in the soil for the plant to take up and to produce proper fruit. But if you're watering inconsistently and you allow your tomato plants to wilt every once in a while, and then you drown them to bring them back to life, and honestly I've had to do that in my life as a gardener, but the more often that you do that, then you disrupt that calcium uptake and your plants will have blossom end rot. So your fruit will look perfect on the top, then you turn it over and the bottom is completely black. So avoid that by just watering consistently, mulching your plant, monitoring your plants. There are products out there you can spray on your plants for blossom end rot, but honestly, if you just consistently water and you fertilize your plants well, you'll have good fruit. You won't need any of those extra products. The next thing for tomatoes is to understand that there are two types of tomatoes out there. There are indeterminate and determinate tomatoes. Indeterminate tomatoes are what we generally call a tomato vine. This is a tomato plant that will continuously grow throughout the season. It will grow until the frost kills it or until you pull it out of the ground. They can grow as big as 6 or 8 feet tall. So it is really important for you to prune that type of tomato, make sure that you trellis that type of tomato, and don't just use a tomato cage, because this is where tomato cages fail, is when an indeterminate tomato grows so large that it falls over the edge of the tomato cage and it pulls the tomato cage to the ground. So for purchasing tomato transplants, make sure that you look for that indeterminate or determinate tag on that notation on the tag. Now, determinate tomatoes, they're pretty interesting. They will grow to a certain size, they will flower all at one time, and they will fruit all at one time. And one example of this is the Roma tomato. And the reason why this is so convenient for gardeners and cooks is that the Roma tomatoes all come in at the same time, they're all collected at the same time, and gardeners can make their sauce and can their sauce for the whole winter all at one time. Of course, it depends on how many plants you're growing. But that is one of the advantages of determinate tomatoes. So determinate tomatoes, because they only grow to a certain size, they are perfect for a tomato cage because the tomato cages are made for them. But just remember, your indeterminate tomatoes, they're going to grow as big as they possibly can, and they are going to continue to fruit all the way through the fall and as late as they possibly can. For potatoes, potatoes are great to grow. They're super easy to grow. They're relatively pest-free, but they take up a lot of space in a garden. So my suggestion would be to grow them in potato bags. It's a product out there that is pretty cool. You put a couple of seed potatoes into the bag, Follow the directions on the tag for the bag, and you should get about 10 pounds of potatoes out of the bag. And you can place that on your patio, you can place it on your driveway, anywhere where it's convenient for you, but they do get very large, the plants get large, so don't put them into your garden bed unless it's only going to be a potato bed. And the last thing is to, for the first couple of seasons in your garden, plant hybrid varieties. Plant F1 hybrids because they have disease resistance. This way you can learn how to vegetable garden in a relatively relaxed manner, and you don't have to worry so much about leaf diseases and diseased pests and things like that. After a couple of years, you may want to delve into growing heirloom varieties, which is really cool. Heirlooms are the vegetables that our grandparents and great-grandparents grew. They're often very tasty. They're really fantastic growing plants. They're easy to grow. They don't always have the best disease resistance, which is the reason why the hybrids came into existence, because the hybrids were bred to have a healthier plant, healthier leaves, resistance to, mold and mildew and things like that. But yes, grow. The last thing I want to talk about is the health benefits of gardening. Gardening in itself, the whole gambit of tasks and jobs that you're doing out in the garden, these things work your whole body. So it's really good exercise. You vary what you do every day. You change what task you're doing every 20 minutes to a half hour. That means you're working a different part of your body. So it's really good exercise for your body. But I also think that gardening in general is an extremely helpful exercise for your mental health and your mental state. And it's kind of important right now. People are talking about this a lot. It's important to get out in the sun,